I owned one of those, Tony.
What?
Harley Davidson golf carts.
Oh, nice.
I've had one of those.
Thank you guys all for coming. Oh, we lost it down the back. Notes really quick. The ambitious 19-year Freedom Haven Project's goal is to bring the highest levels of freedom in the world to thousands of people who seek it. We are currently in phase 2 of 4 total phases. Phase 2 is the exploratory campaign where we seek to prove that there's enough support of the idea to move forward on the project. Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah.
Our goal is to find 4,000 people who donate $5 towards the marketing of this project. If phase 2 reaches our goal of $20,000 by 2026, then we'll proceed with phase 3 and which includes finding higher level investors and hiring Samsung Heavy Industries to make the professional designs, prototyping, and testing. So this is one of those things where we just want to see, we have this idea, we have design, we try to figure out who we sell it to, who we connect it to. I mean, we know it works. All the T's are crossed, all the I's are dotted. If we can, in the next 3 years, find enough people to say, whether I'm going to go there or not, I like the idea. Here's $5. We help out with that. Then that means, okay, there's some interest. We can move forward. If we can't do that after 3 years, then we shouldn't even proceed with it because it's not going to, we're not going to get anywhere.
It's not the right timing.
Yes, or we're just not doing it right, whatever it is. On a Saturday evening, we watch. We have a movie night every night, 8 o'clock on our site, and we did different movies that people voted on online to see which ones are most libertarian, which ones they most want to see. And Schindler's List was the one that we did on a Saturday night, and that movie's painful to watch, but very important. It's very. Who here has seen Schindler's List before? Okay. One thing that, as you know, who knows the history of the Jews trying to leave Germany and all the countries wouldn't let them go in, and it was just really difficult. Can you imagine if they had known what was coming up with the concentration camps? I would imagine at some point they would have said, you know what? I don't have papers. I'm just getting in the boat and heading that way. Even if I end up having to be on a boat somewhere or end up in prison somewhere else, all that stuff's going to be better in America than being in a concentration camp in Germany, right? But they didn't really know that was all coming. It takes a lot for people to actually be willing to leave a country. How many here would be willing to leave their country? You already did, okay? Would be willing to leave their country for the sake of freedom. Exactly. Okay, maybe. Yeah. It's difficult. It's really difficult. I grew up. My dad worked for IBM, which of course stands for I've been moved. And I lived in Germany multiple times, and also went on a mission to East Germany, and moved all across the United States. And so I'm used to moving, and I even used to living in the country, even though that was difficult for me. And so when this project presented itself, I was like, okay, that makes sense. But it's interesting that it is really a niche market because most people are not interested in leaving the country, right? But the people who are interested in leaving the country are the people who have already left their countries, which are the refugees, which is what we're going to talk about in a minute. But before we start, I want to clarify, when people talk about freedom, they're inconsistent. They mean different things. Some people say freedom is soaring through the skies, or freedom is having enough money to do whatever you want, or freedom is clarity of mind. When we're talking about freedom here, we're talking specifically about social freedom and economic freedom. Basically, the freedom for you to do whatever you want as long as you aren't murdering, kidnapping, or stealing someone else, or the related things. Freedom is defined as from its opposite, which is force and compulsion. Murder, kidnapping, and stealing is force and compulsion, and freedom is living your lifestyle in the absence of those things. If no one's going to come along and use force on you, and you can just live your life, whatever it is, you're able to choose your own life, that's freedom. That's a freedom that we're talking about here in this presentation. Any questions on that? Make sense? Basic 101. I say this because it's surprising how many people, you're all the way through it, they're like, yeah, but freedom, and they were talking about something completely different freedom-wise. So what were you going to say? Oh.
No, it just all hits home for us.
going back, I was for this presentation and research different migratory movements where large groups of people left because of a bad situation and migrated to a new frontier that was not really inhabited yet in order to find freedom. Basically leaving their country and leaving, for the most part, governance behind them to go to something strange and completely different. The 30-Year War, sometimes called the Protestant the Protestant Wars, was between 1618 and 1648, and actually had the percent of people that were killed was actually greater than the Civil War. So it was surprisingly so.
Who was fighting that war?
It was basically that's where that started with Martin Luther, and he inadvertently started the Protestant movement. People who wanted to have, and there's a whole bunch of levels. So it was also the people who wanted the Bible to be available to the people in the English language. It was basically the Catholic Church losing a lot of power in that region at that time, and there was a war that developed between it, and people wanted to be free, and it basically covered the entire European continent at some point. But in that, one of the groups in that were a group that fled to Amsterdam, Denmark, that area, and they eventually became the Pilgrims at Plymouth. And so they came here, and even though they made a lot of mistakes, they were. It took a while for them to figure out how to use freedom, and that they should be using what freedom is, because they had the communism, whatever. But they left their country to go to a new place to be a refuge, to flee an oppressive government. Another example is in Nauvoo, Illinois. This is the Mormon expulsion from Nauvoo, Illinois. You guys familiar with that? You guys know the Mormons? Yeah. Their actual name is the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they are a huge group of people, and they moved to Nauvoo, Illinois, which was a pro-slavery state, and their beliefs were anti-slavery. And just like the New Hampshire Project, actually, which is interesting, they actually they could actually outvote the local areas, even though that wasn't their intention. It was a huge migration of members that moved to that area, and it kind of caused a conflict and stuff that ended up then being kicked out, and they fled to what was then became Utah. But at the time it wasn't Utah. Actually, at the time it was Mexico. So they technically left our country just to find freedom and not be killed and stuff. So in modern day, the UN estimates that there's 25.4 million refugees around the world. That's a lot.
Wow.
These are people, you have to imagine what would it take for us to leave our country. These people went through that to leave their country. So it kind of gives you an idea of what they went through to get to this situation. This is, I believe, our primary target audience, because they're already willing to move. They need a place to stay, and freedom would greatly benefit them. There's one, this is the Zatara refugee camp in Jordan. Has 1.5 million refugees. There's a lot of poverty here. The poverty, I would put forth the idea that poverty isn't because the government and other people aren't doing enough to help them. The poverty is because they lack freedom. No matter how impoverished this area is, I put forth the point that the statement that these people would develop prosperity if they actually had freedom there. An example of that is, who knows the history of Hong Kong? When the Silk Road, which is what that path is named of, who knows the history of the Silk Road? Southeastern Asia, it was a path where drugs, those opiate wars, UK won the opiate wars against China and ended up conquering then became Hong Kong. But then they turned around and negotiated with China and says, okay, well, we're not really conquering it. Let's call it a lease. We're leasing it from you for 99 years, and after 99 years, we're going to give it back. That was 90 something or 1980 something when they give back the 90 something, I think it was.
90s.
Yeah, they give back the lease to China under the condition that they would still maintain their freedom. That kind of fizzled out. It doesn't exist. And
That worked well.
that's sad. But this is China. This is Hong Kong around the time. This is between 1868 and 1872. There's a lot of poverty in China. Hong Kong. It was basically a third world country. This is Hong Kong in modern day. You see the difference? Hong Kong, even though they were part of the UK, they were essentially kind of left alone. One of the people who was kind of in charge of overlooking Hong Kong made a decision to kind of just let them be and let them do their own thing. So Hong Kong ended up, kind of by accident, having the highest level of economic freedom in the world, even greater than America. And that allowed them to grow, to build something for themselves, and they went from being a third world nation to a first world nation in like 50 some odd years. So that's and Hong Kong has no natural resources to speak of. It's basically a big rock in the ocean. It has fish, yeah, but that's not much compared to India, that had all kinds of resources, but they chose socialism, and they also had democracy. It has democracy, and Hong Kong does not. Democracy is a benign dictatorship. Basically, UK owned them. Yada yada. The only difference between those two, India is becoming poor, Hong Kong became rich, and Hong Kong has freedom. So basically, if you take a place, even if it's a barren desert, no matter where it is, and you give them freedom, people there will make the best of that situation, and they'll prosper, innovating in ways you couldn't even imagine at the time. I believe that is something that the Zatara refugee camp and all these other refugees around the world that are stuck in various camps where the free market does not exist, where the government has all kinds of strict rules where you can work, what you can do, who can come in, how you can barter and trade. Yet there's a black market, but it can only do so much. If they had real economic freedom, I think those people could prosper, and they'd be willing to actually move forward. In the world, you guys heard of the Economic Freedom Index? The Economic Freedom Index, these are some of the countries. The blue is Singapore, yellow is Lithuania, it's actually gotten a little better. Gray is Sweden, and purple is the United States, and it's gone down. We're currently number 25 in the world as far as economic freedom goes, which is surprising to hear. We automatically just assume that America's got to have the greatest economic freedom in the world, but that hasn't been the case in a while. Actually, hasn't been the case in a very, very long time, but we're not taught that.
We need to slap that Joe Biden sticker. I did that.
The Freedom Haven seeks to create a floating port city outside the jurisdiction of existing governments that will have the greatest social and economic freedom on the planet. I'll explain really quick exactly how we plan to do that. Who has heard of the exclusive economics of this? Okay. The exclusive economics of, who has heard of Rose Island? There's a Netflix episode on that recently. Some guy who thinks probably a lot like people here at PorcFest do. Is like, I really don't like all these regulation stuff, and I want to have freedom. I'm just going to make myself a spar, 5 miles from shore in Italy, and just live on it and enjoy freedom. And it ended up becoming a restaurant, and people just flocked to it. It became their own state. They were actually in the process of having the UN recognize it as an actual official country, Rose Island. On Netflix, it's pretty cool if you want to look it up. But then Italy basically attacked it, and it got the people off of it and sank it. And because of this, the UN said we gotta make sure this doesn't happen in the future, because technically speaking, that was Italy attacking another country because they were in the process of actually being recognized. It's kind of great, but still, it's so they created the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, and like 99% of the countries in the world have signed that. And here are all the countries that have signed it. That's not it. I don't have that slide. Most of the countries in the world have signed it, and that slide, that law, United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, they all agree that their jurisdiction ends 200 nautical miles from shore, which means all this dark blue here is outside their jurisdiction. There's other technical aspects of this as well. For example, let me get some water real quick. Even though their jurisdiction doesn't go that far, most countries in the world have also signed various international laws having to do with oil on their ship and how their crew is treated and the quality of their ship and things like that. And those are signed by most countries, which means we kind of need to abide by those laws as well. And we need to have a flag that is recognized by the International Maritime Organization. Otherwise, we'll be attacked as a pirate ship and they'll seize us. There are a couple little things like that, but those laws only apply to the ship and to the crew, not to the passengers. Long story short, even though there's some technical stuff around it, in this dark blue area, the passengers of these ships can have all the socioeconomic freedom that we seek. Today, you went out there today, you'd have all the socioeconomic freedom you seek. How many would want that? Yeah, that's why I'm here. There are people today that go in under little yachts or little small boats, and they go out and they spend months out there, and they say, I'm free. And they just sit there and live through their resources until they have to go back to shore to get more food and work for a little bit. And basically what it ends up being is a 1 or 2 month vacation out on the ocean. It's freedom, but without a thriving free market, you can't really do much with it. If you're in isolation somewhere, you can be free, but it's us together producing something. That's what really allows us to actually do something great with freedom. I want to show you a couple of people who have actually been living out on the ocean and actually retired. They live on the ocean permanently. Let me pull up the list. This is Patrice Muller, who lived on a ship on the sea in a cruise ship basically, 14 years from 1995 until 2009. She lived on the QE2.
Wow.
She spent an average of about $80,000 a year to live there. This is Leona Wachstetter, or what they call her Mama Lee. She's been living there since 2005. She lives there today. She lives on the Holland America line, then she moved over to MS Prinsendam, and then to Crystal Serenity. She wrote a book saying, yes, I might be homeless, but you should see my yacht. This is Norton Javelin. He's been living there since 2005. He lives on a 7 Seas Navigator. Mario Salcedo, they call him Super Mario, that's why they had the cake and stuff there. He's been living there since 2000. He's been living for about $72,000 a year on a cruise ship. He lives on the Royal Caribbean International. But he moves to different ships. He's always trying to find the cheapest route, so he jumps from ship to ship, but he stays on the ships all the time. He just gets off one and gets on the other one kind of thing. And 80% of them are in the Caribbean, constantly switching between cruises within the same cruise lines. As far as living as a group, there are other solutions that have been in place for a while. This is called the MS World, MS the World. The problem with this is that this is the ultra elite. The cabin on here goes for between $1 to $10 million. It's functional, it works, but that's not what I'm interested in, right? On the other end, you have Life at the Sea Cruises. This is the MS Gemini. After I made this slide, they're looking to switch it to a different cruise ship, but the idea is for $30,000 a year, you could retire on these, which is not that bad per person. This is the Symphony of the Seas. By the way, I don't know if you can tell the difference in size between these cruise ships. You guys see the difference in this one here?
That's like the other one's like 4 times that size.
Yeah, and this is to give you an idea. One of these wings is bigger than the Titanic, and it has 2 wings on both sides. This is Symphony of the Seas. This is 361 meters long, 72 meters in height, and 66 meters wide. It has 18 decks and a total personnel capacity that's 6,680 passengers and 2,200 crew, or basically 8,880 people total, live on this floating city. Now, that picture doesn't do it justice. I wanted to show you a quick 3-minute video that someone else did online that gives you just a brief. They basically did a 1 hour long going through some of the basic parts of the thing and sped it up really fast so you can see it in 3 minutes, because it's huge. And even then, they missed the ice skating rink, they missed the theater, they missed the water show, and like 2/3 of the restaurants and the majority of the decks. So this is just a highlight reel. Because until when we talk about living on the ocean, people generally come back and say, "Oh, you mean like Waterworld?" No. These are the kind of ships where you're playing pool, and occasionally the ball doesn't quite go straight, and you're wondering why. You think, "Oh, that's right, I'm on a ship. It moved just slightly enough that the ball didn't quite go straight." Or what they have is they call it the wine test. We have a glass of wine on the table, and the wine doesn't spill. That's the kind of stability you have in these ships. It's a completely different world. You forget that you're on the ocean a lot. So this is a 3-minute video of it. This guy made it. Can you guys all see that and hear that? This is all one ship, and it's not even the whole ship.
People arrange to stay on the ship long term, or they just sign up for
Normally, people don't stay on a ship long term. They just stay on the ship for their 1-week cruise or whatever it is. Cruise ships tend to not like you living on their cruise long term because it's not their economic model they're going for. They're worried that you might get sick or something else. But the fact that people do it is a baseline of what we can achieve, and I'll expand on that after this.
Massive. It's like a mall.
Yeah. This is the mall. Underneath that, above it, there's the boardwalk where there's a park. This is the outdoor park. Each of those buildings on the left and right is the size of the Titanic. These are just some of the stores. The main dining hall is like 4 stories tall with this huge chandelier going down the middle. This is laser tag games. Oh, they do have a theater. Okay. One of the theaters. Dance club. One of the dance clubs. This is one of the suites. This is one suite. It has its own slide for the kids. I'm not selling this cruise ship. I wanted to get an idea so people can get an impression of what these ships are like. So when people talk about living on a ship on the ocean, this is the baseline. Now, you can live on one of these ships today for about $80,000 a year, but that's too expensive per person. That's too expensive for me. I can't afford that. Some people here probably could, but that's what we're planning to do is. What we're planning to do is this is a design that we've come up with that takes, imagine a cruise ship, but instead of it being tailored towards waste and lavishness and so forth, it's a free market. You go to work, you do your own stuff, and if you want something, you go pay for it. If you want to go see a movie, you go pay for a movie at the theater. If you want to go to a nice restaurant, you go to a nice restaurant and pay for it, or, you know, forgot to pause it. And that's where we're going with, and we believe that we can get the average cost of living on this structure to be only $20,000 a year, with the low end of being $5,000 a year. People at $5,000 a year will be living like the people on a naval ship is, where you have multiple bunks and you don't have much space, but it's functional. You know, so like the impoverished people in other places that have nowhere to live could still live there in these extreme low end situations, like on a naval ship, but participate in a free market, and from there grow and build their wealth until they can move up and do something more. Having the lowest rung of the ladder as low as possible allows more people to be able to engage in the free market. This is the main structure. The cabins, the spaces are modular, so basically you can design your own store, your own cabin, your own house, whatever it is, and it'll be shipped out and put in place and connected up. And if as the free market changes, you can pull out and put in different cabins to change with the marketplace. A cruise ship is a frozen market. It's frozen in time. There's always going to be that water park. There's always going to be that specific restaurant. The nightly shows are always the exact same show every single night. It's a snapshot of like a rich person's paradise for 1 week, and they do that same thing over and over again. This would be a flexible free market where everything changes based on what we the consumers are willing to spend money on. Does that make sense? This is these are some cost comparisons for the three different sections. Like in a cruise ship, as we found, we could have that one cruise liner. You could live on there for as cheap as $3,000 a year. The new Liberty vessel, which is what we call this one, for investors, it's $20,000 a year. Renters, it'd be about $25,000 a year. Basically, the investors would be the ones that would be paying. This structure will be paid for in 10-year leases. The project itself will cover a 10-year maintenance and fuel and the cost of the crew and everything else to maintain this vessel for 10 years after it's built. And that's the investors would be paying for that, and then they would then be subleasing or using it for themselves to other people at a higher rent and get a return on investment in about 7 years. So the renters would be paying higher per month. The investors would be paying lower, but they'd be paying it all up front, and that's what we use to actually pay for to actually build the ship. These are concrete platforms, a new concept technology. You actually, instead of renting these, because you rent the spaces on these, you would actually own one of these, but the cost of living is a little bit bigger because it's all spread out, so you would have fewer options to supply you with water, electricity, and so forth, because you're all kind of spread out. Imagine a bunch of boats tied together, but it's much more advanced than that. This is actually like a floating mat of hollow concrete, reinforced shapes, basically floating units that are triangles, and they're connected in such a way that the whole thing, when the waves come, will just kind of move with it, and they're kind of indestructible in that sense, but it'd be less fun. Here you can play the pool on the table. Here during a storm, you wouldn't be able to. When the storm happens, and it would only be like once a year that you'd actually be able to feel anything on here, because they're still pretty massive. These are 10 meters tall and about 15 meters long. So that's, I don't know if you can imagine how big that it would be. That's pretty big. Any questions?
So these actually sail, or are they tied up?
They tied up would be best, but so you have to be outside the exclusive economic zone. There are only 10 locations that we found where they have sea mounts, or basically underground mountains that haven't gone above the water. An island is an island. An island is a mountain in the ocean where the tip of the mountain has gone above the water. There are lots of other mountains on the ocean where it doesn't quite reach the top of the water, but it's close enough that you can actually anchor to it, which is really weird. You can go out in the middle of the ocean, and there's nothing out there. If you look down and say, oh look, there's a mountain right there, I can see it. Kind of bizarre, but there's 10 locations that we found like that. And we can anchor at those, but we don't think those will be available, because as soon as we have a plan to build and go to one of those 10 locations, the local governments will say, oh, I claim it, it's mine first. So if we can get it, that'd be great, but we're not going to count on it, and so we're instead going to find places where You have ocean gyres where there's slow current. The ocean current is less than 1 mile an hour, and so these things will constantly have engines going, keep maintaining its position in the same location. So you can always find it, always be in the same place. They'll never return to port, but they'll have ships coming to, and there'll be a port city. So ships will come to it. If you want to go somewhere, you just hop on a ship and you go somewhere. But that structure stays there permanently forever. That way, because if you ever go back to port, you're subject to that port's laws, that country's laws, and they can come on board and arrest whoever they want or steal whatever they want. So this way, this would be a freedom haven, and for those who are seeking freedom. Any questions about this?
I was just going to say, for renters, 25,000 each.
Yes, per person per year. That's average. And those are estimates. And we know how much the space is going to cost, how much water, electricity, and food and all that stuff will cost in a free market. In this situation, we're guesstimating based on this. Food will be imported, but things like medical services and so forth will be exported, because we'll have medical services that'll be like 1/10 the cost of what we have here, because we'll have no socialism. There's no taxation here. There's the only laws: you may not murder, kidnap, and steal in the variants. Attacking someone is attacking their property, because that's your body, things like that. We have a whole constitution we set aside, freedomhaven.org, that summarizes this whole thing. And by 2037, if we continue on the same path we're on right now, this should be built. Any questions or thoughts on this? Yeah.
Rick Humboldt left a 10-foot diameter icosahedron in my backyard in Florida, and I took it apart and delivered it to Aureus, and he was thinking about using that in this situation. Cover it made out of 3/4 inch EMT, electrical metallic tubing.
Nice.
And
icosahedron is 20 sides, right?
what?
Icosahedron is 20 sides, right? 20 triangles.
I think it might have been 2 frequency.
Oh.
It's not really an icosahedron
Oh, okay. Just something like that.
variation, but it's 10-foot diameter. He's saying you cover the whole thing with concrete and use it for flotation.
That is essentially what this is. These are concrete spheres
Yeah.
inside, and a icosahedron with basalt fiber rebar, so they don't rust.
Yeah.
Steel eventually rusts, and the problem with rusting isn't that it gets weak, is that it expands, and so it basically pops out the concrete, and if you have the concrete crack, the concrete's going to leak. And that kind of just defeats the whole purpose of having it. Did you know there's actually concrete ships out there? They're actually not that uncommon. There's concrete ships, there's wooden ships, there's aluminum ships, wooden ships, but most of them are most of the larger ones are steel. But the concrete ships are basically just layers of concrete and fiber, fiberglass usually. But that's what this is. This is basically a sphere, and I have more images as well, the design. And I was hoping to actually get my 3D print, so I can actually have it printed and actually have like a demonstration and have it whatever, but I didn't have a chance. I'm a father of 5, and we recently are pseudo-fostering 3 other kids, and we haven't had any time. So I didn't have it there. But each one of these things is a triangle with 2 flat sides and 1 curved side, with a concrete hollow sphere in the center, and the triangle basically gives them all contact. So all the pieces are constantly touching each other. So during the storm, they're not clashing against each other, which will destroy them. They're anchored together in an anchor that does a figure 8. If you can imagine, it goes up over one and down the other around the circle. So basically, they both rotate like this, and they stay permanently connected. So as a wave comes in, the whole thing just goes like this and in extreme waves. But in order to have that, you'd have to have waves that are more than 10 feet, 10 meters tall. And we're going to be in an area of the ocean that has waves that are less than, that's never had 5-meter waves recorded. So,
Meaning the equator.
yes, the South Bay of Bengal is where we're thinking of going, because that's where 75% of the world's shipping container traffic goes through. And that basically means you can buy things like on Amazon, and it'll just take a couple extra days for you to get there, because all the traffic's going by. So what do you guys think? Any thoughts, questions about this? There's lots of questions, just so much material, but this is just a high-level summary of it. We've been working on this for 5 years.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Yeah.
Have you talked to any of the container ships on the feasibility of them stopping to?
It's all about how much money they make per hour.
Right.
Which means the big container ships, we probably wouldn't have them stopping until we're big enough to warrant that. We'll probably have smaller container ships running to us, doing special ones just to us. But the goal is long term. We have our own gantry crane and everything. The goal is long term to actually have one of those ships, and because we're out there on the ocean, they could just come right by, stop for just 1 hour. We can take off 10, add 10, or whatever the number is to make it profitable for them, and they're on their way. And if we can do that, then hopefully we can integrate with those. Otherwise, we have to get our own ship, and that would cost a lot more money. So, the larger the container ship, the cheaper it is to ship your container. It's all about economies of scale. Did you guys know that shipping an apple to a neighboring state costs more than shipping a banana halfway around the world? Do you guys know why?
Taxes.
I'm sure that has a lot to do with it too. It's because of economies of scale. You have if one 20-foot container, which is a TEU, that's the unit of measurement for shipping, one truck usually pulls a 40-foot trailer, which is basically 2 TEUs.
53.
Or 53, okay. And you have one driver pulling a little more of a 2.2 TEUs essentially somewhere, right? On these big container ships, you have 24,000 of these containers, and the crew is 20 people. It may take a week for it to get to its destination, but the economies of scale mean that it's actually cheaper to send something halfway around the world on these massive ships than to put it on a truck and send it across because of the personnel and everything else involved. I mean, even the gas you use on these ships is cheaper than using a truck. It's fascinating.
So how far would this be from a port?
At least 200 nautical miles. Because if we're inside the 200 nautical miles, then we're inside the jurisdiction of the other country.
Have you ever heard of the Hickman Sea Sled?
No, tell us about it.
This guy Hickman, back in the mid-20s, maybe before then, he took the mathematical formula for a V-hull and he divided it into one, and it switched the hull like this, so that you've got two curved pontoons aiming to the center, and you can lift 50,000 pounds planed off with 100 horsepower.
Wow.
Yeah, because of the mathematics involved.
Nice.
The Hickman Sea Sled. And
Hickman Sea Sled.
that would be definitely reasonable for a shuttle to go into 200 miles
That would be nice.
to a port. I mean, that would be for specialty trips, not the container stuff.
Our website is freedomhaven.org, and on there, on the FAQ page, we have also a list. We have a whole bunch of different questions people ask. But one of them is a list of similar projects that have been done recently. There are a lot of projects, seasteading. This is called seasteading, which is basically homesteading but on the sea. Except that most seasteading projects are about making a really fancy, expensive home that floats on the water. It's a sea house that happens to be a few feet offshore and completely within the jurisdiction of your government, which is not about freedom. It's about living on the ocean. This is not about living on the ocean. This is about freedom. If we could do this somewhere other than the ocean, we prefer that, because living on the ocean is more expensive than living on land. But there's no place on Earth that is outside the jurisdiction of another country except for Antarctica.
Galt's Gulch. Galt's Gulch.
Galt's Gulch, yes. If you want to do it under the radar. And there are groups around this country that do try to have freedom in secret somewhere under the radar. They're just not. It's hard to be part of a free market if everything's done is in secret. And there's like the whole Agris movement is kind of about doing things in secret and be able to still have your markets and so forth. But we're looking for something where you could be completely out in the open, public, and you don't have to worry about it because you have the freedom to do so.
How about that island that has a bunch of native, I think, India, Borneo, and they kill everyone that lands on the island?
Yep.
So that sounds like freedom. And they kill everyone, meaning they don't have any visitors, and nobody bothers them. They don't tax them. They don't deal with them at all.
By the local government, and you can't go there. Anytime someone goes there, if they survive, they get in trouble. And actually, interestingly enough, they're about 500 miles from where we are, but they're up north from where we are. but you don't have to worry about them. They don't have any technology. They're not going to come out. They just pick their lane.
No, I mean adopt their policy.
You
Don't
mean-
let anybody on who's not welcome.
That's the plan. We're not quite that way, but we are planning on. You cannot go into the ship unless you agree to the non-aggression principle, specifically to the Constitution we've created. It goes into detail. What do you mean by murder? For example, murder doesn't mean eating a cow. You may disagree with. You may say cows are lives too, but we're talking about human beings here. It goes into those kind of details that if you don't do that, and you have someone shoot their neighbor because they're cooking they're cooking a hamburger, they say, yeah, but they just committed murder first. I'm just offending them. It's like, no, we have to clarify these things ahead of time so we don't have that kind of chaos. But that's what we have planned.
Like Shakespeare said, "'Tis many a slip twixt cup and lip."
I think he was describing me. Okay, well, thank you guys for your attention. And I appreciate it.
Oh, great. Wow, interesting idea.
Thank you.
Very good.
I love scuba diving in warm water.
Another burger?
Yeah.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Oh, good stuff. Thanks so much,
The
guys.
thought of